Hey guys, Nick here. Welcome back to the channel. Today, not necessarily talking science and endurance and sports science in general. What I'm going to do is provide you a couple of highlights from last week's live stream. I'm going to be getting them up more regularly. Wednesday, I think it's 7 p.m. Australian Eastern time. That will change in a couple of weeks with daylight savings coming in, so I will make you aware of that. But we're going to jump on, answer your questions live, go through a topic in the industry. Last week, we went through the wrap-up of the Tour de France, talked through that, my thoughts on it first. Then we go into some Q&A, just answering your basic questions about science of endurance and everything. There's some really good ones in here that I really just wanted to share because I know not everyone's going to go and watch the full replay of the live stream. So here are just the best bits of that live stream, and it's something I'm going to potentially do. So down the track, if you want me to do these little highlight videos of things you might have missed in the live streams going on, let me know in the comments down below. And this is definitely something I can do because I've already got the recordings there. I can easily piece it together. The other thing that I have been working on today and yesterday, and hence why there isn't a specific topic being covered in the video today, is, as you can see, the background's a little bit different. Been working on rearranging this room a bit. We've been playing around with a few things in the house and sorting things out. So I've been busy trying to get all this sort of set up, and hopefully it's going to give me a better environment to live stream. I do have the bike just next to me as well, so working on some things on how I can integrate Zwift into my live streaming and a few other things in that space as well. So I've got a bit to work on to try and get this looking a little bit nicer than it does at the moment, fill it in a little bit, make it a bit more interesting in the background. But without any further ado, here are the highlights, the best bits, some of the good questions and my responses to them from our live stream last week. Make sure you join it. They're really good. As always, leave your questions below. If you have any comments from any of the questions that we go through in these highlights as well, leave them down below. Make sure you keep hitting that subscribe button because it does keep supporting the channel. Other than that, that is it for me now. Let's get into last week's live stream highlights. And I might actually kick things off with a question that came through in the comments earlier today that I thought was a really good one to share. But in terms of any other questions you do have, please leave them in the chat box and we'll get them answered right now. Question that did come through earlier today, and Aaron, actually, I think it was one of yours on the video that I was talking about training in the heat. Had a really interesting discussion about, well, how does this change in terms of, rather than just dry heat, when we get into periods of high humidity, how do these processes change overall? Is this something that will we see anything different? Why is it probably harder for athletes to deal with the humidity? And the main reason is because what we now have in terms of an environmental condition, we now have so much more moisture in the air. Like humidity, essentially, when the humidity goes up, we have more moisture floating around in the air. What does that mean when we try to provide evaporative cooling? So if you've seen the video, or if you haven't, go check it out. It's up on the channel, talking about heat. But if you've seen that video, understand that the process that we go through to cool our body down through sweating is primarily through blood flow towards the surface of the skin. We release fluid in the blood towards the surface of the skin, so the plasma, that goes through the sweat glands. We then sweat. That water on the surface evaporates into a gas and it takes the heat with us, and it's what we call evaporative cooling. It's like the aircon in your house. That's how it works. That's our most effective method. But when we've got high humidity, what we end up having is a lot of moisture in the air, so that fluid on the surface that we're trying to release as sweat has nowhere to go. All it's going to do is just try to get into the atmosphere as a gas, but there's already so much, I guess, water or fluid in the atmosphere in terms of moisture, we can't get rid of it. It doesn't want to go that direction because, like anything, things move from high concentration to low concentration. If we've already got high concentration moisture in the air, it's not going to move. So you end up just having it stick to you. And that's why it's almost sort of harder, because then we're losing that ability to release through evaporative cooling that heat. And that's why it's, again, almost harder to be in a humid environment than it is to just be in a raw heat environment. Raw heat, you don't have to worry about the humidity. It's easy to have that evaporative process. If you pour some water over yourself as well, that water is just going to act like sweat also, and that is going to release into the atmosphere. So we have multiple ways of doing it, but in the humid environment, it's a real struggle because we don't have this evaporative cooling. So we have to rely on things like radiation of heat of our body and just trying to release it as best we can outside of it. It's a very difficult thing to do from a humidity perspective. So how do we then manage the humid temperatures? You just got to be smart about it in terms of understanding how is my body reacting, what is actually happening here. Similar to the heat, you need to bring things back a little bit, most likely in terms of intensity, particularly for your longer, slower stuff. Bringing the intensity back is going to help a little bit. Again, it's probably exaggerated, and things like heart rate are probably going to go up a little bit more because we're struggling to cool ourselves down even further. So it's really just the process of our internal thermoregulation isn't able to do its job as effectively because the external environment is inhibiting. And that's why races like Kona in Hawaii, if you race in Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Malaysia, these types of places are really, really difficult to compete in because you don't experience necessarily that type of humidity if you're coming from a different environment. You train and based in Melbourne, for example, you go through a Melbourne winter, you go race Kona, it's going to be hard regardless, but the humidity is what gets a lot of athletes rather than just the raw heat. So something to consider there. It's also a lot harder to adapt to the humidity aspect in terms of acclimatization. Raw heat, a little bit easier. Your body just deals in terms of improving some of the physiological responses to heat. Humidity is just adding that other factor. It just complicates it a little bit further. So hopefully that answered the question about why humidity is a little bit more difficult. It really comes down to our inhibition of our thermoregulatory processes, or basically our cooling system, not being able to do its job as effectively. Will's question here, we'll move on to the next one. I'm currently looking at buying a smartwatch. What would you recommend out of Apple Watch, Garmin, or Fitbit from a basic level training perspective for general sport and going to the gym? Great question, because there's so much out there. I have my opinions on this, and everyone you watch or listen to is probably going to have their own opinion in terms of what device is best. We actually had this conversation the other day discussing different devices, and it's the type of thing that I actually run two devices personally. I have an Apple Watch mainly for the fact I had it initially to try it out as a training watch and found it wasn't really doing what I needed to in terms of GPS, using a lap button function, all of these types of things. I mainly use it for notifications during the day, general activity counting. So if I'm away on holidays, which I'm not going to be for any time soon, but if I'm on holidays, I'm walking around just to see how much activity I'm doing through the day. I really like the feature that tells me to stand every however long, and most watches are going to have that. I enjoy the notifications that come through in terms of phone, things like that. I mainly use this for just day-to-day stuff. When I go into training, I use a Garmin Forerunner 735. You could use Sunto, you could use Fitbit. They're all going to give their own benefits. I like Garmin because I've used Garmin previously. I think they're rock solid. They do a reasonable job. People have their pros and cons about Garmin being inaccurate or accurate, or your data not being safe. We obviously saw Garmin had some issues not too long ago about not being able to find your data and what's going on, like hacking into the system and things like that. Any company's going to face that at some point, any tech company. So I think if you're wanting to go for something that's going to work on general usability, if you're looking at just general fitness, I'd probably say something like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit is probably pretty good if you want all that other functionality and more of a smartwatch. If you're more looking at performance though, I would go for something like a Garmin, or maybe look into, I haven't used Sunto personally, but I know they do reasonably well. Garmin is just obviously the I guess the biggest brand in the space, and they've been around for quite a long time, so their technology is pretty solid. If we're looking for hyper accuracy though, I sometimes also use a GPS unit in the back of my shirt, like what the AFL players and soccer players and things like that wear. I use that for the footy type stuff that I do. That's actually got what we call higher hertz GPS, so it sends more signals per second. You actually get a much more accurate reading, but I use that mainly when I'm doing maximal sprinting stuff. It doesn't have a display, so you can't look at it. You don't look at it post session, so that's a specialty in itself. Really comes down to what are you doing. If you're a team sport athlete, I'd probably recommend one of those. If you're a team sport athlete and you want to get some general fitness as well, you might also train for a marathon, 5K, something like that. I'd get a Garmin because you can get a reasonably cheap one. The 735 does a good job for multi-sport. There is a Forerunner, a 235, I think that's the one down that just does running. You can go up and get the 930, whatever one you want. You can go to any level. I think that's the bonus of Garmin. They have so many variations that you can really get into what do I actually need. And keep that in mind as well. What are the features I actually need and use? I didn't go up and get the 930, 935, whatever it's called, because I didn't necessarily need any of the extra features. I just needed the multi-sport features, which is why I ended up saving a bit of money. I also bought my Garmin as a bit of a tip through Gumtree. Was able to find a guy who does some testing for Garmin. He's an ex-professional cyclist. He tests a whole bunch of units, has a whole bunch of spare stuff. I also got my Garmin Edge from him as well. And you're able to find brand new watches pretty cheap that way. Kogan's another good website for Australia anyway. You get fast shipping, but also they have pretty sort of heavily discounted stuff. So look around, find what works for you, but have a look at the features and how do they align with the actual training you're going to be doing. I think is the best way to go about it overall. Aaron, again, what have we got? Are you on Zwift? Yes, I am. Would be cool to do group training runs with the NJ crew. Yes, it would be. I haven't worked out. I probably just haven't spent the time yet working out how we can get it together. it is something that, now that you mention it, I think it'd be a really good one to do in terms of jumping on a live stream and going through whether it's going through a training session, whether it's going through a ride. I do have a mate that I train with from a footy perspective who's just getting into Zwift, and he wants to jump on a few rides. So it could be the perfect time to set a little thing up. A little bit of banter and all that around the group would be good. But obviously at the moment, when everyone's sort of doing their own stuff at home, might just be another good way to get a few people around each other, a bit of community happening, bit of fun as well. Nothing too serious. I'm not an amazing cyclist by any means. Josh says he's going to join in the Zwift Rides, so appreciate that. I don't know about you, Will, but you might join the Zwift Rides. We'll see how we go. I'm sure Caleb might be keen to join in too. But it's the type of thing that we can definitely look into it if we get some people interested. We can just do some group ride stuff, and let me know as well what times a day. If you want to send me a message on Instagram or through YouTube, whatever it may be, if you want to leave in the comments here, what time of the day, what day of the week would you prefer? I'm currently riding on Zwift on a Wednesday night, and that's probably going to stay consistent for some time. Usually I'm doing it after dinner, so about this 7. I'm normally riding on Wednesday night. I'm not tonight, obviously, because I'm on here. I rode yesterday because it was raining yesterday and I didn't want to go for a run. People ripped me on Instagram for that. But I normally would ride on a Wednesday night, probably similar time to we'd be jumping on here anyway. So it might be a good one to jump on, do a ride, maybe have some Q&A as well while we're riding. We'll sort of see how that works out. But if you do have a preference of what might work in, obviously everyone's training schedules are going to be all over the place and different. So it's going to be hard to accommodate everyone. But if we can get a reasonable, consistency of what most people can do, then we can start to build a bit of a community. We can get some of the guys in here, and hopefully some of the guys through Instagram and other people have commented, maybe if we can find a time that works for, I know a lot of my subscribers, when I look at the analytics, a lot of my subscribers are actually in the US and Canada. So if anyone's watching on the replay, because I know it's an awful time of day for you to be watching a live stream right now, if there's a time that works for you and you can do the conversion in terms of times, we can try and fit a few people in, because that would be pretty cool, riding with people from all over the world. I think it'd be a pretty cool thing to do. Aaron says Wednesday night. Josh says Wednesday night. That might work pretty well. You're on the bike. I do have a quick one here from Tim. Thanks for chucking in your question. I don't know if you jumped in maybe late, but we've got, I'm training as much as I have ever done before, so running based, but don't feel like I'm improving. Any advice? Really, really interesting one that I hear a lot. Why I'm doing a lot of training, but I'm not improving. Without knowing your specific context, I'm going to take a little bit of a guess here, which I don't necessarily like to do a lot, but I'm going to take a little bit of a guess and say some part of your week you're going out and doing some longer Ks. Another part of your week you're doing maybe some tempo-y type stuff, and another part of your week you're probably doing some threshold-y type stuff. Whether you are or not, that's probably, or like if it's not threshold, it's some really, really high intensity, or what you might call speed work, or however you want to term it. That's a pretty standard running program for the most part. See that a lot. Why does it not necessarily provide long-term benefits? Because what we have first and foremost is what we call the law of diminishing returns. So at some point, if you just do the same thing again and again and again, you're going to get to a point where you're not really going to improve too much more, because we're going to hit a plateau, and that's what it sounds like you're doing. When we get to that point, the easy thing for runners to do is do one of two things. Let's go more volume, or let's run more. Because if I'm running as much as I am, which is essentially more volume, if I'm running as much as I am now and I'm not seeing any benefit, I need to run more times a week, because if I run more, that should make me better, right? But then also going out, and when I say the volume side of things, is volume in a single session of, I'm only doing an hour and a half on a Saturday, I need to go out and do a 2-hour run on a Saturday instead. Not always. We have the data, and I don't have it on me to pull up, and obviously like client confidentiality, things like that. But from work in the lab looking at endurance athletes, we have a number of case studies that basically show a couple of patterns in athletes. The athletes who usually complain of this type of thing, if I'm plateauing, I'm doing all this training, I've lifted my volume, I'm doing more runs a week. Typically, that athlete is going to benefit and see an improvement if they basically cut their training week in half. So don't do as much. You might still run 5 times a week. You might still run 6 times a week. But you basically cut everything right back. So when you go out, you, instead of going and doing an hour and a half, you're only doing 45 to 50 minutes. Instead of going out and doing long intervals, instead in like 10 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 4 times, for example, doing a big session, you're going to go out and do a shorter, sharper session. And that's where, for the most part, those athletes need a boost at the top end, because what they've been doing is this very race specific preparation, threshold in and around tempo type stuff, that they're pushed up where their threshold is in relation to their VO2 max, 95% of their engine. There's no room for them to develop the rest of their engine. I always talk about this. Anyone who knows any of my stuff and has heard me talk about this before, I talk about it as a car engine. If you've got a V6 car engine and you already have 6 cylinders built into it because you've done this race specific preparation and your engine size isn't any bigger, you can only fit 6 cylinders in. Sure, you can tune it up a little bit and you get these 1% gains by making the parts a little bit more efficient. But if we build you a V8 engine and you're running on 6 cylinders, that's going to be more powerful anyway because it's a bigger engine. Then we have room to fit those cylinders in, and that's where you can sort of see the gain. That's where you get the improvement. So what I would suggest is, first of all, the easiest way to identify exactly what you need to do would be to go and get lab tested. Obviously, that's not a reality at the moment because of the COVID situation. The next thing I would suggest you to do is have a look at what is the pace difference. This is a really simple analysis you can do. What is the average pace difference between what you would run for a 5K time trial and what you would run for a 2K time trial? If they're reasonably close together, it's going to be different for everyone based on how fast or slow you are. But let's say, for example, if you run your 5K at about 4-minute pace, pretty sort of moderate, but then you can only run at like 3:45 pace for your 2K, that suggests to me that your threshold's about 4, maybe 4:10 pace, and your VO2 max at 3:45, pretty close too. So that's a pretty close gap. I'd probably say you're about 90% of VO2 max on the most part. Oxygen consumption is going to be a bit individual. I get that, but for the most part, that would suggest that you need to maybe cut out some of the thresholdy type work you're doing in and around threshold, doing 1K repeats, that type of stuff for a period, 4, 6, 8 weeks, however long you want to do it. Go and do some really high intensity VO2 max style intervals. 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, 95% of your VO2 max. So if your 2K time trial is 3:45 pace, you want to go and run at like 3:50, 3:55 pace, holding that for anywhere between 2 to 4 minutes on. Equal walking recovery, can't stress that enough. Equal walking recovery, so 2 minutes running, 2 minutes walking, 2 minutes running, 2 minutes walking. Accumulating 12 to 20 minutes of working time. Give it 4 to 6 weeks. I can guarantee you'll start to see a little bit of an improvement. Give it 10 to 12 weeks and you'll definitely start to see something boost up. If anything, you'll see a bigger gap start to emerge from your 2K average pace to what your 5K average pace is. Once we get that bigger gap, then you can go and train that 1K repeat again. But you'll find that doing 1K repeats, you should be able to go and run, instead of at 4-minute K pace in around threshold, you might be able to run a little bit quicker now. That's going to help drag things up. So that's how we're going to see a bit of an improvement. And like I said, it's not necessarily by running more or doing more volume in a session. It's not doing more sessions. It's by cutting out some of that volume and focusing on the quality at the top end to change the top. Because for the most part, endurance athletes are really good. That's what we do. We do aerobic capacity. We're really good muscular endurance machines. We can just perform a movement again and again and again. By doing more of that, and this is my pet peeve with endurance athletes going into the gym and just doing like 3x15 or 3x20 at really low load, or they're just doing body weight, is that we're just doing the same as what we would do if you go out for a run instead. You're going to do hundreds of steps. There's your muscular endurance. Get in the gym and lift some high intensity. That's going to be a different stimulus, and it's going to provide a different stimulus on the body to improve our top end capacity. Because if we lift the top end, we've got more room to move underneath. Another analogy, other than the car analogy I like to use, is if the roof's only as high as it's built. If I have this roof that's built here, like I've got pretty high ceilings in this house, so it's a bit different. But if I've got this roof here and I'm on a trampoline and I'm jumping at the roof, unless I reposition the roof higher, I'm going to hit my head pretty quick. And that's like threshold being very close to your VO2 max. You're going to hit your head pretty quick in terms of, I don't have much room to move, so I don't have much room to improve, really. I know that rhymed and I didn't really mean to do it. But if I move the ceiling, though, by moving the top end, cut back some of the volume to give you the time to recover and adapt. Doesn't have to be forever. Just for, like I said, 4 to 6 week period. Just cut back some of the volume and bring in some of this really high intensity work as a substitute for your intervals. You can keep maintaining some volume, some long slow. Just don't do as much of it. You'll notice that things go through the roof. We actually, at work, we had a professional triathlete a couple of years ago who was just a volume machine. Cut his training load basically in half. Gave him some really high intensity work because he was really deficient at that top end. We built the top of his engine. I think he went for a VO2 max like 60 to like 70 in the space of 12 weeks. It's pretty insane. He's an absolute machine now, but it's the type of thing that we did that momentarily to get that little change in performance, and then we brought back the volume later and it capitalized on that gain. So that's a wrap of last week's live stream. Hopefully you got something out of some of those questions, some great things that we were discussing in the stream. As I said at the beginning, we'll let you know when the new streams are going up. Typically Wednesday nights, Australian Eastern Time is when we're going to be looking at trying to get a consistent schedule up. But I'm going to play around with it because I know a lot of you are in different parts of the world and time zones may not match up with that. So I might play around with a few throughout the week. So I'll keep you posted on all of those. As always, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Share it with someone who you think might get something out of it, or if you think they would benefit from jumping in the live streams and asking their questions and having a bit of discussion. Definitely share the channel and those with them. Otherwise, that is it for today, and we'll see you in the next one.